We're going to start this section on preparing for an interview with a key tip. No two interviews are the same. Job specifications change, interviewers change, companies change. No two interviews will give you the same interview process or questions. And this means that to be successful, you have to prepare for each individual interview on a case-by-case basis. So how do we approach doing this? Well, the first thing to get a grip on is the key competencies, skills and abilities that an interviewer will be looking for. Now, if you've got through to the interview stage, there's a good chance you've already got a very good grip on what people are looking for in an interview. But it's worth revisiting. Job specifications will often contain lists of essential requirements and nice to have requirements. And it's always worth trying to speak to someone either in the department or the recruitment process to help clarify exactly what it is they're looking for. But having got this list, you then have to prioritise it. So what are the most important competencies an interviewer will be looking for? And that allows you to line up your best examples to meet the most important competencies. And it's a good idea to try and identify the possible questions you may be asked. Now, as we alluded to earlier, identifying question areas is a lot easier than identifying specific questions. But it's still possible to have a good go at identifying and outlining some example questions and possible questions. And these are quite important for practicing with, so it's worth spending a bit of time having a go at defining some possible questions as well. Having outlined and prioritised the competencies and produced a list of possible questions, you now need to go back through your career history and life history to identify possible experiences and examples to help you evidence the required skills. You want to prioritise recent tasks where you have used the competency or the skill that the interviewer is looking for. But if you haven't had an opportunity to carry out the task as it would be in the role that's being recruited to, then you want to find evidence in your history and in your experiences that indicate you can potentially meet those requirements. And remember, if you've made it through to the interview stage, the interviewer and the recruiting managers see potential in you. So odds are you have this experience buried in your history. One option you have to help line up experiences and the situations of those experiences to the required competencies is to use an experience matrix. An experience matrix is a table. Across the top, you list the required competencies for the role, and down the left-hand side, you list your experiences. Or if you are using the star structure to answer a question, the situations you find yourself in where you have used these competencies. Now, this is a reduced matrix. It only has space for 3 competencies and 3 situations, but it's enough to demonstrate how to use the tool. Along the top, you add in your prioritised list of competencies. So towards the left, you have the higher and more important competencies that you believe an interviewer will be looking for. And in this hypothetical example, which is loosely based on a change management job specification, communication is the most important competency we believe the interviewer will be looking for, followed by influencing stakeholders and managing projects. Having added in the competencies, we can then start to list the situations and evidence we have to support each of these competencies. And we can go through our history and write down as many examples as we want at this stage. In fact, it's probably better to generate a list with more examples than we need, because it's a good process for creativity to have as much data to pull on as we can in this process. So having outlined the evidence, having outlined the competencies, we can then go through and start ticking where the situation matches the competency required. So as we saw earlier, developing a new software or deploying a new bit of software can help us evidence communication and effective communication. But it also can be used to demonstrate how we influence stakeholders. And likewise, we can go through all the competencies, all the situations and evidence we have to support these and tick the box. Now, when we are asked interview questions, it's normally best to build your response around a single situation and a single bit of evidence. So if you're asked to evidence your communication skills, it's normally best to build it around a single example. And this is just because it helps give a much more coherent answer, and you aren't in the situation where you're jumping from subject to subject when explaining your response. So the next step in the interview in the experience matrix is to go through and underline or highlight your primary bit of evidence for each competency. And this is the first bit of evidence you will go to when someone asks a question in this area. It's also worth having a few other backup examples to hand if needed, because if the interview goes slightly off-piste and you need to use more than one example, you have it to hand if needed. So matching your experience to the essential competencies and the abilities for the advertised role will help you select the best examples to use in a response. The experience matrix can help you do this. There's one final thing you should do before every interview, and I cannot stress the importance of this enough, and that is to practice. You've outlined a list of potential questions. Practice your responses to those questions. More importantly, practice structured responses to those questions. Think through the likely questions you're going to be asked and practice out loud by yourself. And this has to be out loud. The dialogue that you use in your head is very different to the dialogue and words as they come out of your mouth. So get used to practicing your responses out loud by yourself. You may be fortunate enough to have some trusted friends or colleagues who could help you prepare as well. You may be able to ask them to give you a mock interview, or you may be able to provide them with a list of potential questions you've outlined and get them to ask you questions from that. This is a good idea because it's actually a safe environment if you're doing this with trusted friends and colleagues. They can give you constructive feedback about how your response came across, and you can then learn from that constructive feedback and implement it in future responses. It's also worth noting that we offer one-to-one sessions where we will help you structure your responses and provide responses to prepared questions. And we also offer group sessions where a number of you, 4 or 5, will sit down and take it in turns, not only answering questions, but indicating what it is you liked about other people's responses and giving feedback to people in that process. And that's more akin to an interview process where you will have an interview panel interviewing you for a role. And finally, this is perhaps a little bit of an odd one because you can't always prepare for things you don't know are going to happen, but prepare for the unexpected. It's worth spending 2 or 3 minutes jotting down things that could possibly go wrong in an interview. What if you used the wrong example for one of your questions? What if you used your primary example for communication to answer a question on influencing stakeholders? What will you do in that situation? Will you revert to your second choice example, or will you continue and use the same example? It's worth thinking through a few possible things that can go wrong and deciding how you will react in advance of the interview. So our final key point: to perfect answering questions, practice structured responses out loud. First to yourself, and then ideally to others who can provide constructive feedback.